Types of proteins or protein families. Proteins are made up of amino acids. There are 20 amino acids. Amino acids can be hydrophobic, they can be hydrophilic, they can be charged, they can be neutral. The functions of the proteins is to produce enzymes. They work as enzymes. Proteins, they are structural proteins. They can be ion channels, or there are some other functions of the proteins. These are the 20 amino acids. Amino acids, they are the building block of the proteins. So there are 20 amino acids: arginine, glutamine, phenylalanine, tyrosine, tryptophan, lysine, glycine, alanine, histidine, serine, proline, glutamic acid, aspartic acid, threonine, cysteine, methionine, leucine, asparagine, isoleucine, and valine. So there are 20 different types of the amino acids, and amino acids are the building block of the proteins. This is the structure of a typical amino acid. In case of amino acid, there is the alpha carbon. In the middle, this is alpha carbon. This alpha carbon on one hand is attached to the carboxylic group, while on the other hand, it is attached to the amino group. This alpha carbon on the other hand is attached to the R group, which is also called as side chain. So structure of the typical amino acid is alpha carbon, carboxylic group, amino group, and side chain. Types of the amino acid. There are three major types. Like some of the amino acids, they are small in nature. Some they are polar. So these are the small amino acids, and these are the polar amino acids. Then hydrophobic. So these are the hydrophobic amino acids. In case of polar, they can be charged, positive charge or negative charge. In case of amino acids, can be aromatic, they can be aliphatic, and some amino acids, they are very small, which are called as tiny amino acids. So these are the types of the amino acids based on whether they are small in size, whether they are polar, charged or not charged, they are hydrophobic, aromatic or aliphatic. Proteins are made up of different domains. Linear sequence of the amino acid, they form the domains. These are the sequence of the amino acid in red color. This sequence of the amino acid form the one of the domain of the protein. This is a second sequence, second part of the sequence of the protein. This forms the green domain, and this is the third and the last part of the sequence of the amino acids. This amino acid sequence forms the another domain. So amino acid sequence, that is proteins, they are actually linear sequence. If we see the primary structure of the protein, they are linear sequence of the amino acids. These are the linear sequence of amino acids marked with red color, with green color, and with purple color. So these sequences, they form the domains. This sequence form this domain and two other domains. So linear sequence of the amino acids, ultimately as a result of primary, secondary, tertiary folding, they form the domains of the proteins. There are different methods for the classification of the proteins. One of the common method of classification of the proteins is that proteins can be categorized into three subtypes. They can be fibrous proteins, they can be globular proteins, and the complexes with multiple components including proteins. So these are three major types of the proteins: fibrous protein, globular protein, and the third type is complexes with multiple components including proteins. If we see the first type of the proteins, which are called as fibrous proteins can be in the form of cytoskeletal proteins. The examples are actin, chronin, dystrophin, keratin, and tubulin. These are some of the examples of cytoskeletal proteins, which are actually fibrous proteins. The second type of the fibrous proteins, they can be extracellular matrix proteins. And the examples are collagen, elastin, and fibronectin. So these are some of the examples of extracellular matrix proteins, which is the type of the fibrous proteins. The second main category of the proteins, they are called as globular proteins. There are many subtypes of the globular proteins. Those types, they are plasma proteins, hemoproteins, cell adhesion proteins, transmembrane transport proteins, hormones and growth factors, receptors. Other types of the globular proteins, they are DNA binding proteins, immune system proteins, nutrient storage or transport proteins, chaperones, proteins, and enzymes. So these are different types of the globular proteins. The third type of the proteins, they are called as complexes with multiple components including proteins. They are different complexes. They can be in the form of the examples of complexes with multiple components. They are nucleosomes, ribonucleoproteins, signal recognition particles, and spliceosomes. These are some of the examples of complexes which are with multiple components including proteins. So if we conclude what are proteins and what are protein families, although there are different types or different methods to classify the proteins, but one of the methods to classify the protein is that the proteins can be fibrous proteins, proteins can be globular proteins, and the proteins, they can be complexes with multiple components including proteins.